August 28, 1944. Southern England. A V-1 flying bomb crossed the English Channel at 400 miles per hour. British anti-aircraft batteries fired 2,000 shells attempting to intercept it. 0 hits. The V-1 struck a residential block in London. 14 civilians killed. 6 weeks earlier, on the same coastline, British gunners using a new American device destroyed 79 out of 91 V-1 rockets in a single day. The difference? A fuse small enough to fit inside an artillery shell. A fuse the military experts had declared physically impossible to build. The proximity fuse, officially designated the VT fuse, represented the most closely guarded secret of World War II outside the Manhattan Project. Developed by scientists at Johns Hopkins University's Applied Physics Laboratory, this device did what no weapon system had achieved before. It detonated artillery shells at the precise moment they came near their target. No direct hit required. Traditional artillery shells use timed fuses or impact detonators. Against fast-moving aircraft, timed fuses were guesswork. Impact fuses required direct contact, a statistical improbability when firing at a target moving 400 miles per hour. The proximity fuse eliminated that guesswork. It used radio waves to detect targets and trigger detonation at optimal range. When British Prime Minister Winston Churchill learned of its effectiveness, he called it one of the 3 most important technological developments of the war, alongside radar and the atomic bomb. This is the verified account of how American scientists and engineers turned an impossible concept into the weapon that broke Hitler's final gamble against England. September 1940, Washington, D.C. The National Defense Research Committee received a request from the U.S. Navy Bureau of Ordnance. The requirement: develop an artillery fuse that could detonate near aircraft without requiring direct impact. Navy records show the problem was clear. In 1940, anti-aircraft guns hit their targets less than 1% of the time. A formation of enemy bombers required thousands of shells to stop. The Navy calculated that improving that hit rate even marginally could save ships and lives. Section T, the code name for the Proximity Fuse Project, began at the Carnegie Institution in Washington. Within months, it expanded to Johns Hopkins University's Applied Physics Laboratory in Silver Spring, Maryland. The technical challenge was unprecedented. The fuse needed to survive being fired from a gun at 20,000 times the force of gravity, operate reliably in temperatures ranging from -60 to +160 degrees Fahrenheit, fit inside a 5-inch artillery shell, use vacuum tubes, fragile glass components typically found in radios that could withstand explosive acceleration, cost less than $50 per unit for mass production, and do all of this while generating and receiving radio signals strong enough to detect aircraft but weak enough to avoid premature detonation. Dr. Merle Tuve, director of the Applied Physics Laboratory, later wrote in the laboratory's official history, "Every electrical engineer we consulted said it couldn't be done. The G-forces alone would shatter any vacuum tube ever made." Dr. Charles Lauritzen from the California Institute of Technology, serving as a consultant, reported to the National Defense Research Committee in December 1940, "The probability of success is low. The requirements exceed current technological capabilities." The committee authorized the project anyway. Development contracts went to Johns Hopkins, the National Bureau of Standards, and multiple private contractors. The deadline: produce a working prototype within 18 months. The pressure: German U-boats were sinking Allied ships faster than they could be replaced. January 1941. Applied Physics Laboratory, Silver Spring, Maryland. The research team faced a fundamental physics problem. Vacuum tubes, the only electronic components, capable of generating and receiving radio signals, were designed for stationary use in radios and laboratories. When fired from a 5-inch naval gun, the shell experienced acceleration of 20,000 gigaseconds. For comparison, modern fighter pilots experience a maximum of 9 gigaseconds before losing consciousness. Laboratory records show the first test firings destroyed every vacuum tube configuration attempted. The glass shattered. The filaments broke. The internal elements crushed together. Dr. Tuve assigned the vacuum tube problem to a team led by Dr. Luis Alvarez, a physicist who would later win the Nobel Prize. National Bureau of Standards records document their approach. If conventional tubes couldn't survive, they would have to invent entirely new ones. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Engineers discovered that tubes designed for hearing aids, miniature vacuum tubes built to withstand physical shock, could be modified for extreme acceleration. By March 1941, the team had produced tubes that survived test firings, but survival wasn't enough. The tubes had to function immediately after being fired, generating radio signals, receiving echoes, and triggering detonation circuits within milliseconds. The radio system itself presented the second major challenge. The fuse needed to emit radio waves, detect reflections from aircraft, and distinguish those reflections from ground clutter, clouds, and other shells. Applied physics laboratory reports show the team settled on a frequency near 200 megahertz. At this frequency, the antenna could be small enough to fit inside a shell's nose while still providing adequate range, approximately 70 feet. 70 feet became the critical distance. Close enough to inflict damage through shrapnel. Far enough to allow the fuse time to trigger detonation before passing the target. December 1941. The United States entered World War II. The Proximity Fuse Project received urgent priority. Naval Ordnance records show funding increased fivefold. Additional contractors joined the program. Raytheon, Eastman Kodak, and Sylvania began manufacturing components. But technical problems multiplied. The fuse needed a power source, a battery small enough to fit inside the shell, but powerful enough to operate the radio system. Engineers at the National Bureau of Standards developed a reserve battery activated by the G-forces of firing. The acceleration broke a glass ampule containing electrolyte, which then activated the battery. The system had to work within 0.3 seconds, the time it took a shell to travel from the gun barrel to its target area. By mid-1942, the Applied Physics Laboratory had produced working prototypes. Naval Ordnance authorized full-scale testing. The tests revealed a new problem, one that almost killed the program. The radio fuses occasionally detonated prematurely when fired over water. Laboratory analysis showed that radio reflections from waves could trigger the detonation circuit. If the fuses couldn't be used over water, they were worthless to the Navy. Dr. Alexander Ellett, working at the Applied Physics Laboratory, identified the cause. The detonation circuit was too sensitive. It triggered on weak signals reflected from wave crests. The solution required redesigning the circuit to ignore weak signals and respond only to the strong reflections from aircraft metal. By August 1942, the team had solved the problem. Naval Ordnance scheduled the first combat test. Location: the Pacific Theater, where Japanese aircraft posed the primary threat to American carriers. January 5, 1943. Savo Island, South Pacific. The USS Helena, a light cruiser, became the first ship equipped with proximity-fused ammunition. Official Navy records document the engagement. Japanese aircraft attacked the American formation at dusk. The Helena's 5-inch guns opened fire using the new fuses. The results were recorded in the ship's action report, archived at the National Archives. Of the first 12 shells fired, 6 detonated near enemy aircraft. 2 planes were destroyed. The remaining aircraft broke off their attack. For comparison, The same ship using conventional ammunition in previous engagements required an average of 1,200 shells per aircraft destroyed. Vice Admiral William Halsey, commander of South Pacific Forces, sent a classified message to the Navy Department. The report, declassified in 1975, stated, "The new fuse has proven its value. Recommend immediate expansion of production." But the Navy imposed strict security restrictions. Ships could only use proximity fuses over water, never over land where unexploded shells might be recovered by the enemy. Intelligence reports, now archived at the National Archives, show German and Japanese efforts to recover unexploded proximity fuses. Both Axis powers knew the Allies had developed something new. Neither succeeded in obtaining a working sample during 1943. By December 1943, American factories were producing 40,000 proximity fuses per day. The manufacturing involved coordination among 45 different contractors across the United States. The program remained so secret that production workers weren't told what they were building. Assembly line workers manufactured components without knowing the final product. Only final assembly took place at secure naval facilities. The true test of the proximity fuse was coming. Hitler was about to launch his final terror weapon against England. June 13, 1944, 1 week after D-Day. At 4 a.m., a new type of weapon crossed the English Channel. German forces had launched the Vergeltungswaffe, one Vengeance Weapon 1. The British would call it the buzz bomb or doodlebug. The V-1 was a pilotless aircraft powered by a pulse-jet engine. It carried a 1,870-pound warhead and flew at 400 miles per hour at altitudes between 2,000 and 3,000 feet. War Cabinet records, declassified in 1969, show British authorities had expected this weapon. Intelligence reports from the European resistance and aerial reconnaissance had identified V-1 launch sites in northern France since late 1943. But knowledge didn't equal defense. The first V-1 to reach London struck the Grove Road Railway Bridge, killing 6 civilians. Within 48 hours, German forces launched 244 V-1s toward England. 73 reached London. British anti-aircraft defenses were unprepared. Royal Air Force records show that traditional timed fuses performed poorly against the V-1. The weapon was too small, too fast, and too low-flying for conventional anti-aircraft doctrine. Fighter aircraft could chase down V-1 south, but this required dangerous high-speed pursuits at low altitude. RAF pilot reports, archived at the Imperial War Museum, document the risk. Several fighters crashed while attempting to shoot down V-1 south. On June 18, 1944, Prime Minister Winston Churchill convened an emergency cabinet meeting. The minutes, now public record, show Churchill authorized immediate expansion of anti-aircraft defenses along the southern coast. British Anti-Aircraft Command relocated hundreds of guns to coastal positions. But the fundamental problem remained. How do you hit a small, fast target with conventional artillery? The answer arrived from America. July 1944. The U.S. Army shipped thousands of proximity fuse shells to Britain under emergency priority. Security restrictions were modified. The fuses could now be used over land, but only in coastal defense zones where the sea would prevent recovery of unexploded shells. British gunners received 2 days of training. American technical advisors, working for the Applied Physics Laboratory and the U.S. Army Ordnance Department, supervised the deployment. The difference became apparent immediately. August 17, 1944. British Anti-Aircraft Command recorded the results of a 24-hour period in their operational log, now held at the National Archives in Kew. Anti-aircraft batteries, equipped with proximity fuses, destroyed 79 V-1 rockets out of 91 launched toward London. An 87% success rate. Batteries using conventional timed fuses, operating on the same day in different sectors, destroyed 24% of V-1 South in their zones. The proximity fuse had increased effectiveness by a factor of 3. German intelligence reports, captured after the war and translated by Allied authorities, show German commanders were confused by the sudden increase in V-1 interception rates. One report, dated August 20, 1944, from the German Armed Forces High Command, stated, British anti-aircraft effectiveness against V-1 has increased dramatically, cause unknown. Possibly new gun-laying radar or improved ammunition. They were partially correct. The ammunition had improved, but not in any way German engineers had anticipated. By September 1944, the British had deployed proximity fuses throughout their coastal anti-aircraft belt. War Cabinet records show that between August 28 and September 1, British defenses destroyed 82% of all V-1 South launched. The strategic impact was measurable. Hitler had planned to use V-1 attacks to terrorize London, disrupt the British government, and force the Allies to divert resources from the campaign in France. Instead, the proximity fuse had neutralized the threat. British civilian casualty statistics, compiled by the War Cabinet and published after the war, quantified the impact. In June 1944, V-1 attacks killed 1,935 civilians. By September 1944, that number had dropped to 274, despite Germany launching similar numbers of weapons. The proximity fuse saved lives by making the V-1 ineffective. General Frederick Pyle, commander of British Anti-Aircraft Command, wrote in his post-war memoir, Ack, the arrival of the American proximity fuse transformed our defensive capabilities. What had been a terror weapon became a manageable threat, but the full value of the proximity fuse would become clear in a different theater, where American forces faced a more desperate enemy. April 1945. Okinawa. American naval forces faced the largest kamikaze offensive of the Pacific War. Japanese commanders had committed to using suicide aircraft as their primary anti-ship weapon. U.S. Navy records document the scale of the threat. Between April and June 1945, Japanese forces launched 1,900 kamikaze sorties against the American fleet at Okinawa. The tactical problem was unique. Kamikaze pilots didn't break off their attacks when damaged. They continued toward their targets even after taking hits. Stopping them required destroying the aircraft completely and doing it before they could crash into ships. The proximity fuse became the primary defense. Ships stationed on radar picket duty position between Okinawa and Japan to provide early warning carried maximum loads of proximity-fused ammunition. The USS Laffey, a destroyer on radar picket duty, provides a documented example. April 16, 1945. The ship's action report, filed with the Commander-in-Chief Pacific Fleet, and now archived at the Naval History and Heritage Command. Records the engagement. Beginning at 8:27 a.m., Japanese aircraft attacked the Laffey in waves. Over 80 minutes, the ship faced 22 separate attacking aircraft, including 6 kamikaze strikes that hit the destroyer. The Laffey's 5-inch guns fired 404 rounds of proximity-fused ammunition during the battle. Crew reports and post-battle analysis credit the proximity fuse with destroying or damaging multiple aircraft that would have otherwise struck the ship. The Laffey survived. Of the 22 attacking aircraft, the ship's guns accounted for 8 destroyed, 4 probables, and 3 damaged. Other aircraft were engaged by supporting combat air patrol. 31 crew members died. 72 were wounded. But the ship remained afloat and under power, a result attributed directly to the defensive effectiveness of proximity-fused ammunition. Fleet-wide statistics demonstrate the broader impact. Commander 5th Fleet submitted a tactical analysis to the Chief of Naval Operations in July 1945. The report, declassified in 1972, compared anti-aircraft effectiveness with and without proximity fuses. In engagements where ships used conventional fuses, it required an average of 2,000 rounds to destroy one enemy aircraft. With proximity fuses, that average dropped to 150 rounds per aircraft destroyed. The proximity fuse had increased anti-aircraft effectiveness by more than 13 times. Admiral Raymond Spruance, commander of the 5th Fleet, wrote in his after-action report, "The VT fuse has proven indispensable. Without it, losses to kamikaze attacks would have been significantly higher." The Navy Bureau of Ordnance compiled comprehensive statistics for the Okinawa campaign, published in their Technical Bulletin series after the war. American ships at Okinawa fired approximately 1.2 million rounds of 5-inch ammunition. Of these, 600,000 used proximity fuses. Those proximity fuse rounds accounted for approximately 70% of all aircraft destroyed by naval anti-aircraft fire during the campaign. By June 1945, as the Okinawa campaign concluded, proximity fuses had become standard throughout the Pacific Fleet. Production had reached 70,000 units per day. American factories had delivered more than 22 million proximity fuses since production began. The final vindication came from an unexpected source. After Japan's surrender, U.S. Naval Technical Mission Teams interviewed Japanese military officials. The transcripts, archived at the National Archives, include testimony from Vice Admiral Matomu Ugaki, commander of the 5th Air Fleet, which conducted kamikaze operations. In an interview conducted in October 1945, Ugaki stated, "Our pilots reported that American anti-aircraft fire became dramatically more effective in early 1945. Aircraft were being destroyed before reaching their targets. We did not understand the cause until after the war ended." Japanese technical intelligence teams had recovered several unexploded proximity fuse shells from crashed aircraft or near-miss splashes, but they failed to understand the technology before the war ended. German records tell a similar story. After Germany's surrender, Allied technical intelligence teams found German proximity fuse research programs. The programs were years behind Allied development. A German military technology assessment, captured by American forces and translated by the Foreign Military Studies Program, concluded, "We underestimated Allied technological capabilities. The radio fuse represents a significant technical achievement we could not match." The proximity fuse remained classified until 1945. When security restrictions lifted, the technical achievement became public. The National Defense Research Committee's summary report, published in 1946, provided the official statistics. Total program cost, $1.1 billion in 1940s. Currency equivalent to approximately $17 billion today. Total fuses produced, 22 million units. Personnel involved, more than 35,000 workers across 45 different contractors. But the most significant statistic came from operational analysis. Military analysts at Johns Hopkins University calculated that proximity fuses destroyed 5 times more aircraft than would have been destroyed using conventional ammunition. Vannevar Bush, director of the Office of Scientific Research and Development, wrote in his post-war report, Science, The Endless Frontier, that the proximity fuse represented the most effective anti-aircraft weapon of the war. Winston Churchill's assessment, recorded in his war memoirs published in 1951, was more direct. The proximity fuse was one of the 3 or 4 most vital technological developments, without which victory would have taken years longer to achieve. The scientists who developed it received little public recognition during the war. Security restrictions prevented disclosure of their work. Dr. Merle Tuve, director of the Applied Physics Laboratory, was awarded the Medal for Merit, the highest civilian decoration, in 1946. The citation credited him for the development of a device which saved countless lives and contributed materially to Allied victory. The technology itself continued to evolve. Modern guided missiles use descendants of the same principles developed by the Applied Physics Laboratory team. Today, the original laboratory notebooks, prototype components, and production records are archived at Johns Hopkins University, the National Archives, and the Smithsonian Institution. They document how a team of scientists and engineers accomplished what military experts had called impossible. They built a vacuum tube that survived 20,000 G-forces. They created a radio system that fit inside an artillery shell. They designed a detonation circuit that distinguished aircraft from clouds and waves. And they did it in less than 3 years, transforming an impossible concept into the most effective anti-aircraft weapon of World War II. The proximity fuse destroyed 80% of Hitler's V-1 rockets over England. It protected American carriers at Okinawa. It saved thousands of civilian lives in London and thousands of sailors in the Pacific. All because a team of engineers refused to accept that something was impossible. Their work proved that American technological innovation, systematic, verifiable, and relentlessly focused on solving real problems, could change the outcome of a war. The evidence is in the archives. The numbers don't lie.